Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first virtual event. It's a lovely Friday out there, so I hope you'll all be able to take advantage of your state-mandated exercise. I'm not sure what weekends and weekdays mean to us all anymore. Just to say that we are, this is the first time that we've used this particular platform, so there may be some and I know some people have been fading in and out in terms of their connectivity, so we will proceed. The way that the format will work is we've got a couple of people who will talk to you from the accounting perspective. We've got Gareth Burton, who is an expert in working with digital and technology companies and has lots of freelance and single person company clients. So he will be able to give you some thoughts and feedback. And we also have Jen Smith, who is an employment lawyer with JMW, who will also be on hand to give you some thoughts and take any questions. So working from home for a lot of you is probably the norm. So some of us it's taken quite a bit of adjustment to. And also we really understand and are fully sympathetic to how hard this is for some of you, and how this is, the entire COVID thing has meant that some people have lost a lot of their work. We've only just had packages of support announced that have significant holes in them. So we fully recognise it's a super stressful time. We'll share a link to some mental health and wellbeing stuff at some point during this talk. So if you are struggling, please do take some time to look at that. Also, for those of you who are on your own and struggling, Manchester Digital have a mental health first aider, which is Michael. So if any of you do want to talk to him confidentially, then please do make use of that. And without any further ado, hopefully Shivani will click the button and introduce you to Gareth Burton, who is going to give you some thoughts on the Chancellor's announcement. Gareth.
Okay. Thanks, Katie. I hope everyone can see me and hear me, and I hope the connection's okay. Yeah, just to I've just recorded a video for my clients this morning on the announcement from last night. So I'll probably explain it in a similar format. I think there's a lot of people asking the same questions with good reason. And sadly, I was left quite disappointed by last night's announcement. Yeah, the first thing, let's be clear. The announcement was about the self-employed and freelancers. The discussion they had in Parliament, which I did an earlier video for my clients earlier in the week, was about supporting the self-employed and freelancers. And I thought by using the terminology freelancers, they were going to hopefully offer some support for owner-managed businesses, director-shareholder, limited companies. A vast majority of vast proportion of my clients are self-employed, and a lot of those who are self-employed operate via a limited company structure. Now, if you apply for a mortgage, if you speak to the man in the street, then you tell them you've got your own business and you operate through a limited company, they would say you're self-employed. If you speak to HMRC, their definition of self-employed is somebody who is a sole trader or a partnership, which is essentially the same thing as a sole trader, but more than one person involved in the business. And so they were quite clear, the announcement wasn't very clear. And the questions afterwards I was disappointed in, but the releases they've made since are that the support measures announced last night were for sole traders and partnerships. And their use of the word freelancer is for people who don't operate as a limited company. So the only recourse that directors of limited companies have got at this moment is via the job retention scheme for furloughed workers. And again, they've used the terminology in the announcement that directors may be able to qualify for the job retention scheme to support 80% of their earnings. And I think that's important as well, because the idea, the detail that we got so far on furloughed workers is that the employee has to cease work for the business. So there's going to be a lot of people out there, somebody like myself, I've got, lots of clients who are in difficult circumstances, so I'm continuing to work. I won't be claiming anything from anybody. But dividends are specifically excluded from furloughed workers. Trading profits from your limited company are excluded. And therefore, they're saying that directors can qualify for this 80% support. But on the other hand, they're saying technically you should cease to work for the business. Which I think is somewhat unfair, to be honest. I think that even looking at the, reading up this week on the chartered institutes, tax institutes have been liaising with HMRC and trying to get further clarification on these matters. And they gave an example of a pub that's had to shut its doors, but the owners of the pub are continuing with business administration and preparing for when they reopen. And they think that they might be excluded. So I think that's it's going to be difficult times for owner managed businesses, and I think people are going to have to lobby the government about supporting director shareholders of limited companies. That said, I'll maybe deal with any questions you've got around that at the end, and then I'll move on to what HMRC are considered calling freelancers, and those of you who are self-employed. Okay, so qualified criteria. I know we've had a question about people who have traded for less than 3 years. Don't worry, you will qualify. The qualifying criteria are that you are registered to file and should have filed by now an 18-19 tax year self-assessment return. Okay, so even people who are registered for filing an 18-19 return but have not yet filed it can qualify. They've given you 4 weeks to get that 18-19 tax return filed. I wouldn't suggest anybody go out and try and register for 18-19 now and file a return, because there's going to be a lot of kind of anti-avoidance and fraud checks that would kind of prevent people just trying to file now. But if you're registered for 18-19, then you will qualify. Other qualifying criteria are that more than 50% of the income on your tax return has to come from sole trade or partnership income, okay? And your profits have to be less than 50,000 on average for the last 3 tax years that have been filed. So that's 16-17, 17-18, and 18-19. Okay. If you've got less than 3 years, don't worry. They've said that they will take your taxable profits on average of whatever years have been filed. So if you've just filed 18-19, it'll be 80% of 18-19. If you've done 17-18 and 18-19, it'll be the average of those 2 years. Okay. So and again, the average profit has got to be less than 50,000. I may mention that, which I think is unfair in that it's so binary, because if somebody who's earning £500,000 a year won't qualify, okay, but somebody who's earning £55,000 a year on average for the last 3 years won't qualify, okay, which again is unfair. It's too binary. They have said one kind of really useful and interesting point is that if your average for the last 3 years was over 50,000, but your 18-19 return was under 50,000, you'll qualify. So people who had maybe a couple of good years and have not done so well in the last couple of years, they'll qualify, which is quite useful. The way it's going to be administered is that it's a taxable grant. So it's a grant, it's not a loan, you don't have to pay it back, and it's classed as taxable income on your tax return. It's there to replace your income. All right. You can continue to work, which is good news. The job retention scheme for employees and directors I've just been talking about is somewhat unfair in that you have to cease work essentially to qualify for it under what they've announced so far. But with the sole trader version, you can continue to work. The qualifying criteria is that you expect your income to be affected by the COVID crisis. Therefore, even if you expect your profits to be reduced by £1, which everybody will, you'll qualify. Another big failing, I think, in the system is the way it's going to be administered. HMRC are going to assess your last 3 year returns. They will contact people. They're hoping for early June, which is ambitious. They're hoping for early June, and therefore they will contact people in June, supposedly, say that they think you qualify, and then they will send you a form to complete, probably something online, and then issue you a grant, hopefully in June, for the months of March, April, and May. A 3-month grant at that point. So people have got to get through the next sort of 2 or 3 months without any money. What they've said in the meantime to try and help support people through that period, just to sort of bear in mind, is that if you're a sole trader and therefore you qualify, you will have a July tax payment on account, most likely coming. and so they're allowing you to defer those until January next year. Okay, so any money you were due to pay in July, you could use that in the interim. When you get the grant, then set the money aside to pay the taxes in July, ideally. If you're VAT registered, then any VAT bill you've got due coming in the kind of the current months up to the end of June, which is going to be your March, April, May, or February, March, April VAT quarters, you could defer that until the end of the tax year. So there's maybe some support there. If you're self-employed and your income has been significantly reduced, then they suggested you apply for universal credit, to which they've had some flack because the universal credit process takes, at least 5 weeks, apparently. And they genuinely in the announcement suggested borrowing money. There's the Corona Business Interruption Loan Scheme, which I think has a lot of limitations because most of the major banks aren't really supporting it as they should, and it's going to a lot of secondary lenders. Therefore, it's quite expensive finance, and a lot of them want personal guarantees. So I'm not a huge fan of that, but it might be an option. Finally, there's the Small Business Grant Scheme that they announced last week or the week before. Again, if you work from home, you don't own a managed business, then you won't qualify for that. It's only for people who've got small business premises, and therefore the rateable value of your business premise would be £15,000 or under. So there's a lot of limitations. There is some good support for some sole traders out there, but there's a lot of people who are going to miss out for various criteria. Another group that has significantly missed, I've just seen it in the questions, in that if you've only got a tax return for 1920, if you've been trading for a year, if you've moved back to the UK, as somebody's mentioned, you've been contributing to the economy, you've been a sole trade earner for the last 12 months. Because you've not made a return for 1819, they're saying you're accepted. The Chancellor was even asked this in his questions, and he said that we're sorry, we can't get this to work for everybody. So some people are going to miss out, and those people are going to miss out. Same as the group who are over £50,000 earnings. I was really hopeful before the announcement. I was hoping with the freelancer element, they were going to bring something in for owner-managed businesses. I think they've had to make some tough decisions. We're all making up as we go along. So I understand that, there's got to be a bit of understanding. It does fill a gap for some people, but there's also a lot of people who are going to be excluded. I think that's my summary as we see at the moment. And as I keep saying to my clients, they're making announcements with very little specific and detail. So we're kind of trying to work out the detail as we go along. So,
okay.
I'll speak now and then let me know if you need me back.
Okay. So Jen, have you got any points that you would like to add into that, please?
Hi. As Gareth said, this has been made up really as we go along, and it's all developing at pace. I appreciate that it is very operationally complicated what they're trying to achieve. My concern possibly now is that because the furloughed element, if you like, of what the government are suggesting, employers can place staff members on furlough leave. That's probably not going to be applicable to the majority of people, I would imagine, in this event, because the majority of people in this event will be self-employed. And therefore they won't be able to avail themselves of the furlough leave opportunity. The government have been they've not clarified yet things like 0 hours workers, will they be able to qualify for furlough leave? There has been some discussion to say that they will try and include people on 0 hour contracts. The difficulty there would be that most people wouldn't have a consistent monthly income, so it would be, how would you calculate then this 80% for people in that situation? The furlough leave, though, generally we've been quite well receptive to. It is very good what the government have put together at pace. Very hastily. There's still numerous questions to be answered. We're all watching the Chancellor Live today to try and get more clarity on what the legislation actually means. And this morning we're still trying to work out what it means in terms of basic employment rights, like do your holidays still accrue? The government did say last night in the new guidance that all your standard employment rights would still continue. So you'd still have your employment rights such as unfair dismissal, etc., things like that. But they've not specifically actually mentioned annual leave, and would that accrue? The problem we foresee is if people do accrue their annual leave, the minute, hopefully we're all back in a normal, or whatever the new normal is, working world, everyone would have accrued loads of annual leave and everyone wants to suddenly take holidays. Obviously that's not going to work for any business. So it's from the point of view of an employee, that the furlough leave entitlement does appear to be a good option to be explored. Frustratingly, I've had some inquiries from clients who've hired new people who were not on the payroll on the 28th of February, and that's what the government are saying. People have to be on the payroll on the 28th of February to qualify to be put on furlough. And they're saying, well, I've hired these people, they've left jobs. Can I not put them on furlough leave? And the answer is no, if they weren't on the payroll on the 28th of Feb. And we think the thought process there is to stop probably fraud. So potentially some business owners may be trying to put like spouses, daughters, sons, siblings, etc., trying to suddenly put them on the book, so to speak, and then claim through the scheme. So we think that's the thought process possibly as to why the governments are adamant that no, people need to be on the payroll on the 28th of February to be able to qualify for this. But I know that saddens some employer clients of mine where they say, I'm feeling very guilty if I can't do anything suddenly because they weren't on the payroll on the 28th of February, sorry. But they come to work for me having left another job. But unfortunately the guidance is clear there that they have to be on the payroll on the 28th of February. So from an employment perspective, from an employee perspective, and listening to what Gareth just said about having, digested the Chancellor's announcement last night, it does seem to be that the self-employed are and remain to be in a more invidious situation. And it seems that from last night's announcement, there's still so much uncertainty for the self-employed, more so possibly than the actual employed.
Thanks, Jen. So we are also, sorry, could you mute for a minute, Jen? Thank you. So we are also going to make sure that we feedback to government all of these points and concerns, and we'll do that through our UK Tech Cluster Group, and we have some calls today with DCMS. So we will make sure that all these points are raised. I think there's a couple of questions here. So a specific one from Andrew about furlough status and working for your own limited business. Gareth, do you think you could come in and answer that, please?
Yep, happy to. I think, I'm not sure whether I mentioned this in my in what I was discussing. In the I can't answer the question 100% yes or no, like any of this. They've not made it clear. They've said that you may qualify for furlough status, and as it stands, qualifying for furlough status means you cease to work for the business. So, if I was being pedantic and a pessimistic accountant who was scared of getting sued, then I'd probably say, well, if you continue to do administration for the business, then you've not ceased to work for the business, and therefore, technically, if I had thrown a red, you wouldn't qualify. Okay. That said, if that's the case, then no directors would qualify because you're technically speaking, your only responsibility as a director of a limited company is to make sure you do your accounts and file your taxes. That's your job. So I think that what they're probably doing is announcing stuff with pace, and at the moment they're saying you need to be, they would exclude you. But I would hope that they're going to operate some kind of leniency around this, and then maybe look at, and then I don't know what they're going to do about the kind of assurance and checks afterwards. But I would think that if your business is one that has closed, or you can't continue to work, then you're qualified for the furlough. And the checks and measures, again, I don't know how they're going to put this in place. But if you're a business who continues to work, and therefore as a director you continue to operate as an employee, not as a director, my guess will be is that if you fulfill your director's duties of just filing your accounts, then you'll probably qualify for the furlough pay. if you're fulfilling employment duties, therefore meeting customers, doing work, doing as you currently do, then you probably don't qualify, because the furloughed work is for people who are going to be laid off, who can't continue to work. And therefore, those directors who continue to act as an employee won't qualify. Take myself, I'm an owner manager of a limited company. I'm not going to take the furlough pay myself. I'm going to continue, I'm going to try and keep all of our team on full if they want to and if they're willing to. And I won't be qualifying for myself, because I think it's important to remember that just because, there's a lot of people getting support because they really need it. And if you're a business that, isn't as affected as others, then it's business as usual, and that's what the government are aiming for. But if you're one of those businesses who's significantly affected and your employment, your income's dropped off a cliff, you've had income disappear, your contracts, people aren't paying for work you've already done, then you should be taking advantage of the measures. Is that okay? Do you want me to carry on with some of the questions, Katie, that I can see in the chat? I'll let you go.
We can't actually hear you at the moment.
Yeah, I can't, Katie.
Sorry, everyone. I forgot to unmute myself, and I've just spoken for a couple of minutes, and I forgot to unmute myself. Apologies. What I was saying is we'll carry on with Q&As, and Jen, if you want to contribute to one of the answers, just unmute yourself, and we'll know that you want to contribute. The thing I was saying, that when we finish this Q&A, there is then an opportunity for you for one-to-one networking. So that will give you a chance to talk to peers and also to talk to us a bit more and ask any questions. But for now, back to Gareth to start working through some of those questions. And Jen, could you mute yourself again, please? Okay.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, I think it's Alison Futrell.
Yeah, okay. So just having a look at the questions there. So, so Alison was freelance. The first thing to clarify was Alison says it was freelance work, usually through agencies, and I invoiced through an umbrella company. Okay, so that's limited company then, rather than an individual, I'm imagining. Device. 17, 18, I was employed. We've done last year when the GT were dried up. I got some direct work, which I decided to do as a sole trader. I have a UTR number because I haven't invoiced through the umbrella since November. The umbrella sent me a P45. It does my date to me, it's 2nd of March. I feel the universal credit form must be obviously impossible to get. Wow. And you're absolutely right to be confused by that one, Alison. So I think to try and pull the details out of it, I can. If you're working through an umbrella company, essentially that you're employed by that company. They don't operate as sole traders in most cases. I have seen the occasional time. So 17, 18 employed, so that won't help. Now, if you've done some direct work as a sole trader and you've got a UTR number, that's good news. But it depends on what was done for your 18-19 tax return. Okay. So it's the 6th of April 18 to 5th of April 19. If you've declared some sole trade income on that return, okay, and if that sole trade income was more than 50% of your total income on the 18-19 tax return, then you should qualify for 80% of whatever that sole trade income was, up to a maximum of 2,500. To cut through all of this, have a look, just get your personal tax returns out. Have you got a return for 18-19 filed or due to be filed? And if you are going to do it, file it in the next 4 weeks, okay? Is more than 50% of that income sole trade, self-employed, and is it less than 50,000? If that's the case, then you'll qualify for this credit. You can probably ignore, they might take on your 17-18 tax return, if you've got some employed and self-employed. If you've got no self-employed on there, then you'll probably be okay. They'll probably just base it on 18-19. So they'll just look at that sole trade self-employed income on your 18-19 and any prior year's returns and average it off that. So the only thing that was your message was quite comprehensive, but what it hasn't got in there is the sole trade income for 18-19, and that it looks like from what you've explained, that's what yours will be based on. Okay. Lucy's question. Okay, I've got somebody saying, I got a comment there about I'm on mute. So if that's the case, let me know. One of the organisers can jump on video and let me know.
I can hear you.
Okay, fine, thanks. Okay, I'll just work through the questions and then let me know if there's anyone else can't hear me. Lucy's question, a tax return for 18-19 was almost exactly half earnings through a full-time job, which I then left, and half earnings from freelance work. Will I still qualify? That's a really good question. The criteria they announced was that more than half your earnings comes from self-employment, and so it's your gross earnings. So let's say, for example, again, this is this is as I understand it. Say your salaried income gross was £20,000, and let's say your self-employed income, gross, ignore taxes with all this, was £19,000. You won't qualify. If your self-employed income was 21 and your employed income was 20, then you will qualify, and it would be 80% of that self-employed earnings, not 80% of your total earnings. It'd be 80% of that self-employed element, as I understand it at this moment in time. Rebecca, yeah, sadly, you're one of the, that's one of the big pushbacks. It was even raising the questions to the Chancellor. I've got a number of friends who went into self-employment in the last year, and those, because they've not got an 18-19 return, then they won't qualify. I think from HMRC's perspective, I'm very rarely sympathetic to HMRC. They're one of the worst organisations I've ever had to deal with, but they do know that they're trying to protect themselves. It's a bit like Jen was saying with regards to the unfortunate circumstances a lot of people fall into with only just joining the March payroll. Any tax system that's put in place does get abused, and therefore they're thinking that if people are registered for the 19-20 tax year, a lot of people, when asked to put in their earnings that they're going to get 80% of back, they're going to inflate those earnings, and they can't afford to take that risk. So sadly, because of the abuse of the system that would be there, then there's a lot of genuine people who are going to miss out. Okay. Sean's question, how is self-employed profit after capital allowance? Yes, as again, little specifics, but it's going to be based on your taxable profit, and your taxable profit is, income less expenses, less capital allowances. So yeah, that's what I think it's going to be based on. Pension contribution, typically with a pension, that doesn't actually affect your income, it affects your tax rate. So I don't want to get too specific, but if you put £100 in a pension, the government go and put £25 in the pension for you on top of that to give you the tax relief. It doesn't reduce your taxable income. It also extends your basic rate tax band so that you get a bit more before you go into the 40% tax bracket. So if I were looking at this, I'd be looking, look at your, what was the self-employed taxable profit on your tax return. They won't factor in pension contributions, I don't think, unless there are certain schemes, so, like salary sacrifice for employees, where they will allow that to be deducted against your taxable income. If it's one of those schemes and it did reduce your taxable income, then it might reduce your taxable profits. But most pension contributions don't affect your taxable profit. They affect the way in which you're taxed, and a lot of the tax relief is given at source, which means they get the tax back from the government. Okay. So Alison's only doing sole trade work last year, pre-April 19 was all umbrella. Yeah, so sadly, that's as I've just explained. If you look at your self-assessment return for 18-19, I would imagine you've got salary and dividends on there, and therefore it looks as though you're going to be one of those unfortunate people who fall through the cracks. Sorry. Daryl's question, majority income of PSC, but I also receive some income from a rental property. How does the government class the rental side, self-employed capital gains, and will that affect my ability to furlough? It won't. You could, again, not sure, but you could almost disregard that. Rental property is investment income, and that's the HMRC's logic with regards to people who have got limited companies. By taking advantage of the, people are limited companies, yes, because of the protection, the limited liability, but when a lot of people went limited, it was to not pay as much national insurance, which HMRC have now you almost pay the same amount of tax, but they're saying, look, dividends are investment income, rental property is investment income. That doesn't factor into this. This is, you've got employment income for the employee, that's the job retention scheme, and you've got trading profits for the self-employed, and that's the self-employed support scheme. So for your particular circumstance, Darryl, unfortunately, personal service company means you're excluded from the most of the self-employed support. You potentially could get, you could ignore the property rental, and you could potentially furlough yourself under the job retention scheme. Nick, no such thing as a stupid question, as I always say. Is most of the stupid questions are really good questions, especially when it comes to tax. But no, I don't think that a co-working space will qualify, because what's going to happen is that it's going to be based on the rateable value of your business premises. I've got some friends who work in local councils, local government, and they're being taken off certain projects because they're all working from home, and they're being shifted over to this other project being administration of the grant scheme. The grant scheme is going to work in such a way that the local councils are going to assess all the people who've got the rateable value of under £15,000 or under, or if you're in the retail, hospitality or leisure sector, £51,000 or under. And they will directly contact those businesses to say, we think you qualify for this grant. So if you're in a co-working premises, you're essentially like a subtenant. So it would be, they're contacting the business owner, the business that is registered to pay the rates in that business. Therefore, most co-working spaces are going to be rateable value above the qualifying criteria, and I think they'll miss out. Robert's question: if you have an 1890 return but significantly lower than what you would disclose in 1920, how would the 80% be calculated? Again, 1920 is going to be disregarded in all of this. They're going to look at 1819, and then if you've got the prior 2 years, those 2 years as well, and they will take an average of those 3 years. If you've got 2 years, they'll average 2 years. If you've got 1 year, they'll take it on 1819 only. So, again, I'm not saying you are at all, Robert, but there's going to be a lot of people who are, doing better in 1920. So, 1819 wasn't that great, but 1920 has been a better year, and that's the current level of earnings that you've got. But it's also open to abuse, because if they allowed people to factor in 1920, a lot of people will inflate their 1920 income artificially in an attempt to try and get more money from the government. So sadly, it's just going to be based on 1819 and the prior 2 years and an average of those 3 years, which is a shame. Ivan's question: full-time employed with another company since October 19. I'm running my limited company side by side. For the past 24 months, my work has been exclusively R&D and full-time until October. I'm still preparing the R&D claim with my accountant. The past 2 years, I've only claimed minimum wage each self-assessment. Would I qualify for any support? Okay. I'm running my limited company side by side. Okay, so I think that you've got two potential areas of support. Obviously, your full-time company that you've been employed with since October, if you were employed by them on 29th of Feb, and they are going to make you a furloughed worker, then you should qualify for 80% of your salary up to a cap of 2,500. It's 2,500 including all costs. So that's including employers' national insurance and pension contributions, by the way. So if any of your employees who want to maximise your furloughed amount, then you would probably stop making pension contributions. So again, that's an agreement between you and your employer. So the employer essentially suggests it, and you as an employee agree to it, and you make an agreement between the two of you. It's almost like you're just being laid off temporarily. So there's potentially of 80% of your salary contribution from the employment, and then with regards to your limited company that you own yourself, there's nothing that I've seen anywhere that excludes people from if you're furloughed from a job. There's nothing to stop you working elsewhere, or if you've got two jobs, you could potentially be furloughed from both. I might be wrong, but I'm not seeing anything to exclude that. So again, going back to the conditions I talked about earlier about, what may or may not qualify as a director of a limited company, there's potentially somewhere for you to claim the 80% from both your employer and from your own limited company. Okay. Robert's question: if you furlough yourself, how do you declare and prove your salary for the 80% allowance? Can the 1920 self-assessment be done? This? No, sadly not. They're saying that the furloughed pay is going to be based on a defined period, and they've not ascertained what that defined period will be yet. I've read in a couple of places that it's going to be based on the February payroll. So what was your pay for February? We'll give you 80% of that. It might work something like statutory maternity pay, where you take, if you've got varied earnings, they take an average over a number of weeks and take a proportion of that. So they've yet to announce the calculation behind the defining period for which the furloughed salary will be based on, but it is going to be based on a defined period, and it is going to be done via what's been reported on via real-time information, which is where everybody's payroll information is submitted online with each pay run. Hi Nigel, good to hear from you. Situation: if you're sole director of multiple companies, good question. It's not been categorically clarified, but there's nothing that I've seen that excludes people from being furloughed from more than one employment. It might yet come out in the wash that that's the case, but if you're a director of multiple, it's all going to be furloughed work is going to be all based on payroll. So the question is, what salaries have been declared from which company? I work with a lot of tech startups, so some of these kind of tech companies are getting decent support because they've got investment, because they're not profit making, they can't take dividend. Therefore, they've got a market rate salary, and therefore they're getting 80% up to the cap of 2.5K. So if you're a director of multiple companies, what salary was declared via RTI on the payroll, and where? Are all of those companies ceasing to trade, or ceasing as in temporarily frozen, or are some of them going to continue? As I said earlier, if the business is going to continue to operate, then you probably shouldn't take the furlough pay, because you continue to work and earn money. It's for people who can't earn money. Nice one, Jamie. Thank you. Yeah, so I'd be having a look at each of those various directorships and what salaries were declared. Were you on the payroll for February? If you're on the payroll for February, then there's a potential furlough claim for each of those directorships, which Jamie has just qualified for me, saying from the gov.uk website, then you can be furloughed for each job, which is good news. Good for me to hear. Yeah, Andrew, I agree with your point. How do we get clarity going forward? And I think you've just got to keep up to date with the announcements. There's a very specific section. If you just Google business support coronavirus, business support COVID, there's a very clear list of support measures there, and all that is available for each of those. But they're making up as they go along, which we've said numerous times, which is understandable. I'm actually surprised they've done what they have thus far this quickly. It's unprecedented, and I'm still skeptical about what they're actually going to implement, because they say they've got the furloughed workers scheme they're going to build in a matter of weeks. And I made the point to my clients, they literally take a few weeks to open a letter normally. So how they're going to build an online portal for declaring salary and getting a refund, then we'll see.
Okay.
I'll hand it over to you, Katie. Cheers.
That was a Herculean effort in answering questions and some very complex situations. Jen, have you got anything else to add? Is there any points you'd like to make in terms of an employment perspective?
I think one point that Gareth made before about the directors with the furlough leave, I think that's going to be really interesting to look into, because I've just tried to have a quick look if the government have issued any guidance on that, and I can't find anything yet. So I think potentially that should be an area to be looked into. It does make it very clear in terms of the furlough that you are not to be doing any work whatsoever. So if you're doing bits of work, then you should really just be on reduced hours. If you've been placed on furlough leave, you are not doing any work whatsoever. But I do think it's an interesting point that Gareth raised about what's it mean from a director's point of view. I mean, directors, you've got fiduciary duties as well, so you need to be very mindful of that. But for the majority directors, it does involve generating income, you know, trying to generate income to keep business going. Well, I would interpret that you're working, you know, you're absolutely working. So I think it's going to be really interesting looking into actually where the fine line, you know, about being a director for a company and being an employee, because you're wearing two hats. But I think possibly some people will maybe try and ride two horses there. But I do think it's really interesting, Gareth, raised that point. And it's not something that we've discussed in our employment team yet about that potentially being an issue. But like with the 28th of February, which the government were very clear in the guidance yesterday, that you have to be on payroll by that date. I think, and it's Gareth said, where there's tax, there's fraud. And I think that's what they're trying to minimise there. But I think the director's point is a really good point that Gareth made. He's absolutely right. If you've got more than one job, someone just picked up there that, yeah, you can be furloughed for both jobs. They're both separate jobs. The cap obviously applies for both, but yeah, you can be separated. We were looking for more guidance on the commission bonus side. We advise lots of recruitment companies. Obviously, commission is very important for their roles, and there was further clarity given on that last night. But my impression of the furlough scheme really is that it's quite good what the government have come up with, you know, with very, very little notice, and the clarity they gave last night. There's still some huge unanswered questions, but they have given further clarity. And I think, like Gareth said, a lot of how things will be calculated will evolve from the roots of things like how they've done statutory maternity pay. They've done lots of guidance on SSP, with fear that, you know, employees will now be thinking, well, if I've got quite an advantageous sick pay policy, you know, some people may be thinking, well, should I just go on sick, you know, try and get 6 months full sick pay as opposed to being put on furlough leave. And it's things like this that the government will be trying to anticipate. So, and employers and the Federation of Small Businesses, things like that, people will be raising questions all the time, and that's why they keep, you know, the fine tuning the legislation and answering the questions now.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah,
Jen. Gareth, sorry, I was just going to say, there's another quick. If you want to make your points, then answer Alison's question, and then we'll move to working.
Okay, just one kind of very slim piece of positivity in all of this for limited company owner managed businesses. I'm not sure how many people are aware, but because of the ongoing situation and all of this, they've deferred ridiculous IR35 legislation they were bringing in as of April. So those people who are on a management and have been caught, because it is relevant, because Alison's question, a number of them talk about umbrella companies and that kind of stuff. So IR35 has been deferred, which might help some people coming out of this the other side. But to answer your question, Alison, it's a very good point, and it's quite possible. You know, you're quite right. If you were an umbrella company and therefore your salary was your income was being derived via salary from that company, then it's possible. To simplify matters, you know, you qualify for furloughed leave if you're on the payroll at the end of February and you have ceased to work for the business. So just have a look at that umbrella company. I'm sorry you did give detail further up, but I don't want to get confused by scrolling through the comments. But if you know, have a look at what payroll was run for that company for February. Were you on it? If you're on it, great. And they're probably going to give you 80% of whatever that salary was on the February payroll, and maybe earlier periods on an average basis. But again, subject to you ceasing to work for the business, which we're yet still a bit of a grey area.
So hopefully that has given some of you, I mean, I know we've not got any silver bullets here, but hopefully we've managed to clear up a few things for you. Massive thanks to Gareth and Jen for stepping in at really short notice to support this Q&A, and I think, you know, some quite complex situations. And I think actually it's time to go over to the networking. So participating, see you in one-to-ones.
Okay.